Last year, on September 22nd, 2023, one of my biggest childhood dreams came true when me and a friend of mine traveled to Japan. For pretty much as long as I can remember, I have adored Japan, its culture, its history, its mythology, of course its pop culture. I am a big anime fan, and I've always just been fascinated by that country. In this video, I want to tell you a little bit more about my experience traveling to Japan and if my expectations were met or not, and give you a little bit of an overview when it comes to the cost of traveling to Japan for 16 days from a German point of view. Since I'm from Germany, I'm going to give you the prices in euro, but I'll make sure to put the equivalent dollar amounts, pounds and so on screen to provide a more international perspective. This way you'll be able to compare prices to your country if you're not from the EU or Germany specifically. The costs were as follows. For flights, each of us paid 1,395 euros and 37 cents. For the Airbnb, we paid 698 euros and 70 cents each. For our JR passes, we paid 322 euros per person for 14 days. Now, since then, the JR pass has become quite a lot more expensive, so if we were to travel the same way we did this time, it wouldn't make sense for us to get the JR pass next time, because it would frankly be cheaper to buy the tickets for the Shinkansen, for example, individually. I also decided to get my driver's license translated because I wanted to have the freedom to be able to hop into a rental car and just drive along the coast of Japan, for example. Now, I didn't end up driving in Japan, but I was still happy that I paid the 70 euro premium to get the driver's license translated and shipped to Germany. If I would have decided to get it translated in Japan, I would have only paid around half that. Now, alongside the driver's license translation, I also ordered a Suica card online and I paid around 10 euros for that, and it came with 1,000 yen preloaded onto it. Now, a Suica card is a prepaid card that you can use to pay for public transport, you can use it to pay at some convenience and some restaurants. It's just a very useful tool to have, and I would highly recommend getting one because you don't want to waste time waiting at a ticket counter in a busy Tokyo station, for example. Using the Suica card, I spent a total of 33 euros and 98 cents on public transport, which wasn't covered by the JR pass, as that only covers JR lines and not every line in Japan. The total cost, without considering groceries, eating out and experiences and whatnot, came down to 2,496 euros and 14 cents for me. My buddy probably paid a little bit less than that because I had 2 days where I traveled by myself because he wasn't feeling too well, so obviously there's going to be a little bit of variation in that. In addition to that, I also had to pay for my passport, but I'm not going to add that to the total cost of this trip as I can utilize it in future travels as well. Now that we've talked about the less variable costs of my trip, let's also take a look at what you can expect to pay for food, drinks, experiences, souvenirs and stuff like that. So unfortunately, I won't be able to give you an exact list of what amounts I spent and where, but in total I spent an additional 671 euros on food, drinks, experiences and souvenirs, 200 of which went into the only souvenir I bought for myself, and it's not an anime figure or something like that. I randomly came across the Instagram profile of a tattoo artist from San Francisco who lives and works in Japan, and I was lucky enough that she could squeeze me into her schedule for my very first tattoo ever. I've been thinking about getting a tattoo for a while, and this way it not only is something that I've wanted to have on my body anyway, but it also has a story behind it and meaning to myself. The remaining 471 euros went mainly into eating out and getting groceries. We didn't spend too much on experiences as our focus was to capture a lot of photos during this trip in particular. The only cost that went into experiences were around 20 bucks each for a ticket to the Tokyo Skytree, including the Tembo Galleria and the Tembo Deck, and for me an additional 14 euros or so to take the Fujikyuko line from Otsuki to Kawaguchiko station and back. Now, the 14 euros I spent to take the Fujikyuko line are already included in the 33 euros and 98 cents that I listed as spendings using the Suica card. Okay, now that we've talked about the costs of my trip, let's quickly talk about my first impressions and if my expectations were met or not. I'm not going to go into too much detail in this video though, as I'm planning on making more in-depth videos about this in the future. Therefore, let's just quickly answer the questions at hand. Were my expectations met, and what were my first impressions? After landing in Tokyo, I was somewhat shocked at how efficient the whole immigration process was. I've never experienced anything like that. Since we signed up for the Visit Japan web app beforehand, which is recommended by the way, the only things we had to do were to show the QR codes provided by the Visit Japan web app at the corresponding stations, get our passports checked, and that was it basically. I have to say though, the workers at the airport didn't seem as friendly as you'd expect at first. I'm not saying they were rude or anything. They were just very focused on their work and getting as many passengers through the immigration process as fast as possible, so I guess it makes sense. After finally getting my luggage though, which I was worried for a while that it might have gotten lost in transfer, me and my friend exited the what I'll call the immigration center of Tokyo Haneda Airport and arrived at the area of the airport where you could visit shops, get your JR passes and stuff like that, for example. Here's also where we were first met with the friendliness that you so often hear about when people talk about Japan. We felt very, very welcome, and the workers in this area were very eager to help you, and it was honestly kind of amazing. So we got our JR passes, activated our SIM cards, grabbed some cash and left for our Airbnb. Now, because we had about 5 hours to spare before we could check into our Airbnb, we decided to walk there from the airport, as it was only going to take around an hour or so because we stayed in Kamata Honcho. That walk felt so freaking amazing, and I immediately fell in love even more with Japan, its architecture and so on, even though it was pretty hot and humid on that day. My buddy, on the other hand, unfortunately didn't have as great of a time on that walk as I did, because one of the wheels of a suitcase decided to just give out and not spin at all, which made pushing and pulling it somewhat of a nightmare. Other than that though, I think it's easy to see that my first impressions were overwhelmingly positive. And now for the big question. Were my expectations met? Well, since I've been interested in Japan for most of my life, I thought I'd gotten a pretty good idea on what this country is going to be like, but let me tell you, I was so wrong. My expectations were exceeded time and time again. I for sure expected to enjoy being in that country, but I couldn't have imagined just how amazing it was actually going to be for me. I would travel there again anytime, and I 100% will go back as soon as possible. Currently, my girlfriend and I are thinking about going back by the end of 2025, and I'll make sure to document the whole process for you if we do. And with that, the simple answer is yes, my expectations were met. But for the most part, actually, they were exceeded. And I could not have wished for anything better than that. I hope I was able to give you a bit of insight on what you can expect to pay for a Japan trip with a duration of around 2 weeks, and provide you with a little bit of an idea of what to expect when you get there for the first time. I had a ton of fun revisiting my memories of first arriving in Japan, and I hope you enjoyed the video as well. If you got any feedback on how I could improve my videos in the future, just let me know in the comments and I'll make sure to read all of them. And until next time, mata ne.